Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. And our mission here on this podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then help you exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. Foundational to a successful exit plan for most business owners we work with is having their business increase in value over time. And so that when they go to get value out, there's enough value net of taxes to do everything they want to do next, whatever that might be. And foundational to building value as well as protecting business value in these days and times is the use of technology. What technology, when to upgrade or change your technology, how and when to implement it, particularly in light of a planned exit timeline or departure date. And with new developments like AI and growing risk like cybercrime, it's only going to become more and more foundational, even to the smallest of businesses. So we regularly have conversations here about technology, and as long as we exist, we always will, I'm sure, and we'll continue to. So our topic today is implementing new technology in advance of a business transfer or exit.
And Pat, I get the pleasure today of introducing our guest, Mac Lillard, who's actually a senior manager in the Risk and Advisory Services Department of GRF CPAs. So he's right. Of course, no one's in the office, so I was going to say he's probably right down the hall, but then again, he probably isn't. Mac's been with us about just over 9 years. Recently, he's been helping me more with business valuations and litigation support stuff, but his main role is senior manager in our risk and advisory service. And we've had, our guests, I think, are pretty familiar with Melissa from that same department. We've had her on at least once a year for the last few years to discuss, cybersecurity and things like that. So that's certainly an area that Mac is also has a lot of expertise. So Mac and his team perform comprehensive risk-based assessments to help clients implement risk mitigation practices and strengthen their operations. He provides a wide range of client services, providing technical expertise to help organizations build and maintain risk management processes, optimize systems through integration and automation, enhance controls for fraud prevention, detection, and improve their cybersecurity posture. He prides himself on being a trusted advisor to all his clients, making himself available year-round to answer questions, provide support, and advise on top risks and mitigation strategies. So, Matt, great to have you join us. Glad you're able to do it.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. Happy to be here. I've listened to a lot of the episodes, been following you all for a while, and I know a couple of my colleagues have been on and have expressed how much they've enjoyed being on the podcast. So really appreciative of you all inviting me to be here today. I hope your listeners appreciate it too.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we welcome Mac, and Melissa was actually in our last episode, so she can be a hard act to follow. So we'll see how you do today.
Yeah, and I'll try not to be. I know we're talking about data security and technology and stuff, so I'll try not to be too repetitive of anything Melissa talked about last week or a couple weeks ago.
Well, you know what we were thinking of mostly to focus on today. And you kind of brought this up, and Pat, I think it's kind of interesting that it's really a topic, through all of our well over 100 episodes, we've really never talked about in detail. So I think it's good that we're finally getting around to it. But I think what I'd like to focus on today is, as we help a client get ready to sell, there's a couple things. Number one, it's important that they have adequate and the proper systems in place. And that can be everything from cybersecurity to accounting to HR, whatever. And we've talked about that a lot, about documenting systems and things like that. And I think that's been helpful to our listeners. And we've talked about how systems can help increase the value of a company in the sense that it can help to drive the bottom line, improve cash flow, and things like that. So, we've kind of covered that. But the one topic I don't think we've covered in detail is kind of the timing of all this. Because, you don't want to be in a situation where, you're getting ready to sell and your profits have dropped because just in the year prior to sale, you've gone out and purchased a really expensive software package, which is hitting your bottom line. The implementation costs are hitting your bottom line, and it's going to be it may be 18 months or 2 years before you really start to see the financial benefits of the process you put into place.
Yeah.
So I think timing is really, really important. So Mac, let me ask you a general question. Generally speaking, when you working with a client and they're implementing, let's not talk about the cybersecurity stuff first, but just, general process updates, like maybe a new time and billing system, or maybe a new CRM program, something like that. I mean, in your experience, how long does it take for a company generally to get up and running on that to the point where they're actually seeing a financial return?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really depends on the system you're implementing. If you're implementing an electronic bill payment system, that's very easy to implement. You can implement something like bill.com in a matter of a couple of hours and see those benefits, within the subsequent 2 weeks, just in the ease of issuing payments, pushing out disbursements, tracking everything throughout the entire process. So, for something that's like that, like an electronic payment system, you can get that up and running within a couple of weeks, from vetting to implementation and to actually rolling it out. Obviously, as the systems or the responsibilities or capabilities within those systems grow, the implementation process gets more and more complex. So for a CRM system or a grants management system, timekeeping system, something like that, we would estimate probably somewhere around 3 months for the actual implementation process. You're going to need probably another 3 months of training and getting the users accustomed to the platform, working through those, initial implementation hiccups that everybody deals with. So that's, now you're kind of talking about 6 months, and that doesn't even include all of the vetting and the procurement procedures you go through beforehand, right? To look at different solution providers, identify who's going to be the best fit for your organization. And so that's something that we do see a lot of our clients struggle with. It's just the overall time commitment, thinking that it will be a lot less time to get up and running than it really requires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's say that, we have clients who have a 10-year time frame for exiting. As a matter of fact, most of the owners that we're going to work with in doing exit planning, they have a time frame of somewhere between 2 and 10 years. And let's say 10 years though, what would you say to them regarding tech investment, while they have an eye on maximizing value or sale proceeds when they exit in 10 years? Do you have any thoughts about how to think about that strategically and what questions they should be, considering, and any kind of procedural advice that you might have for them, Mac?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of what questions they're considering, before I get into kind of the specifics, just wanted to kind of talk about, why organizations implement new technologies, some of the benefits or some of the reasons that drive the overall initiative. So it could ultimately be the result of outdated or legacy applications that are going to be no longer supported by the provider. Microsoft Great Plains is a great example of this right now. They're going to be discontinued around, I think, 2026. So Microsoft is still going to continue supporting the application, but this process becomes a lot more difficult. Maintenance becomes more expensive. The level of interaction or communication between your accounting system and other platforms is going to suffer as a result of that. So it could be an issue that's ultimately out of management's hands and is the result of the service provider. So it's a necessity to move forward with a new implementation. Could also be the result of new regulatory frameworks. Maybe if you're receiving a grant or a contract that requires you to be ISO certified or compliant with NIST, or for government contractors, CMMC is one of the big ones that's been coming about in recent years. So again, could be something that's out of the organization's hands, ultimately is required by a grant, contract, or regulatory framework. But more often than not, most cases that we see, these technology enhancements are really just aimed at closing gaps in the current capabilities, improving data collection and analysis, and providing improved reporting. So these are sort of wish list items as opposed to necessities that drive the overall decision to implement a new project. So this, again, just helps providing all these improvements in the way of financial and digital transformation, improving the communications between systems, and streamlining those activities to create a more seamless workflow. So just kind of wanted to.
It's then that third category, right? That in regard to a 10-year time frame, you really, because the first two categories are going to be forced upon you.
Exactly.
So in that third category, how would you, if you own a business and you want to continue to increase the value of it, and technology, of course, is more and more part of that, and it can be expensive. How would you think through when and how and if to go ahead and move forward and implement a new system?
Yeah, and I think the 3 to 10 year timeline is kind of the ideal timeline to be considering this. Realistically, probably even 3 to 5 years. If we look back to 2014 and all of the changes technologically that have happened since then, something that you implemented in 2014 could be out of date by now. So if we look at that at around 3 to 5 years, I think that's the appropriate time to begin this planning process. And Walter alluded to this already earlier, but ultimately, for these technological advancements, the driver behind this, you're trying to boost revenue, you're trying to cut costs, improve your operating margin or your net income. Ways that technology can assist in that is reducing your production or manufacturing costs, being able to produce more goods or services for the same level of effort or the same costs. Maybe it provides new opportunities to reach new markets or customers, create new revenue streams due to these improved capabilities. And then looking at the expense side of things, again, reducing the labor hours associated for certain tasks, reduced waste, cheaper manufacturing costs. So all of these, again, help to improve that operating margin. And I think, as again, Walter had mentioned before, in order to actually see those effects or the impact of the new technology take place, it's obviously going to take time. We just kind of walk through a very high level potential implementation timeline for a new system. The process of implementation, of vetting, then implementation, getting the system up and running is something that will probably take 3 to 6 months to even upwards of a year, depending on your organization. So in order to actually see the value of that, it is going to take another year or two to actually, again, see the increased revenue or the decreased costs associated with that. So valuations, they generally look 3 to 5 years into the future when you're using the income approach and looking at future cash flows. And then you're also going to be looking 3 to 5 years into the past. Historical performance is an indicator of future performance. So if you don't have that historical information to rely on, it makes it really difficult to almost impossible to incorporate the benefits associated with these new technologies into the valuation process.
So Mac, I think to follow up on what you're saying, I think business owners can think, well, someone I don't have, I'm not really that up to date technology wise, but someone buying me is going to see that, they can implement this stuff and I'll be that much more profitable. But what they're kind of missing the boat on is that may be true, but the buyer is not going to pay you for that. So in other words, the buyer is going to be, for the most part, going to be basing what they're going to sell you or what they're going to pay for you based on concrete projections or historical data. They're not going to base it on hypotheticals. Now, they may go in their own back room and say, okay, this guy wants X. Yeah, I think we can afford to give him that because we're going to be able to grow it a lot more. But you're not going to say, hey, you wanted X. Well, guess what? I'm going to give you even more because I think we can do this and that. That's all going to be buyer side upside. It's not going to be shared with the seller. So like you're saying, if they want to capture this value in the business, they got to implement soon enough that it's actually trickling down to the bottom line.
Exactly, because they could ultimately say, "Hey, we expect this new technology to grow our operating margin by 5%." But just because somebody says that doesn't mean we can factor that into our valuation, right? There's all
Yeah,
sorts of risks that could be associated with that. Maybe you
right.
implement the new technology and it doesn't actually increase operating margin by 5%. Maybe you hit a hiccup in the implementation process, and like you said earlier, it ends up increasing the overall expenses to a point where it actually decreases your operating margin.
Yeah.
Maybe management gets to the point, prior to the valuation where they actually decide, you know what, we have too many other priorities. We have too many other things taking up our time and our resources. We're not even going to move forward with the implementation. So yeah, it does make it difficult to almost impossible to factor those types of things into the valuation, especially the closer and closer they're done to the sale.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've mentioned implementation quite a bit, Mac, and that's one of the pieces that we find owners have. Well, there's two things. They're not adverse to buying new technology. That's our experience. As a matter of fact, they're leaning forward, knowing that technology is a part of life these days, and we need to have the best and the brightest to increase efficiencies and so on and so forth. And so they really aren't adverse to buying technology, but they end up sometimes with a few pieces of technology that are disjointed. And I'm not a tech geek, if you will, and it'll become obvious if it hasn't in the past here in a second. But they don't talk well together. The pieces of technology that they get all these great things that they were sold on for good reasons, but they don't talk with each other. And then too, though, because of that or other reasons, the implementation either drags on forever or it never even gets completed. So what would you say about those couple of challenges, if you will?
Yeah, I think that really emphasizes the importance of doing your due diligence. And like you said, sometimes they don't have the necessary skills, knowledge, expertise in-house to properly vet solution providers, and provide that expertise, identifying what other solutions the solution you're looking at currently integrates with. And I think, yeah, that's something that should come out in the evaluation process. Again, organizations do different methods. They might reach out to vendors directly. They might issue an RFP. But yeah, that type of information in terms of the systems that you're currently working on, and most importantly, also systems that you're considering switching to in the future, all need to be considered. And that's typically something that we do encounter with our clients, is that, they want to bring in a grants management system, but they're not considering the CRM system that they currently use. All they're concerned about is integrating it with the accounting system, or maybe that grants management system also needs to link to the electronic payment system so that you're able to track all of your disbursements and your balances, but you don't do the due diligence to understand whether or not those systems can be made. So yeah, it's really a matter of doing the due diligence process of cataloging all of the IT assets that you have, that you kind of have on your wish list to be able to communicate with that system, and evaluating that during the vetting process. Because like you said, solution providers, they're ultimately trying to sell their product, and they may have all sorts of other solutions or add-ons that they can recommend that may not actually be a best-in-class product, or might not be the most suitable solution for your organization. So understanding what other providers are out there, and again, yeah, what communicates well with the system, whether it's via an API or a application programming interface that allows for the real-time transfer of information, or if it's just through, a strong communication and interaction where the importing and exporting of data is relatively more straightforward and streamlined than with other applications.
Hey, Pat, you know what this is kind of emphasizing for me? And it's been a really good discussion, Mac. I appreciate it. But, the one thing, and we kind of say this constantly, but again, this is just another good example of why you need to start planning early.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is we've talked about sell side due diligence. I mean, it'd be really, part of that sell side due diligence should include somebody like Mac going through your systems. We've talked about how important it is from a cybersecurity standpoint, but I think also from a system standpoint, and we've discussed that, just to see, how your systems can be improved, but you need to do it in in a time frame that allows you to make the decision. And if you're going to go forward, gives you the time to implement the system. And as we've been talking about, getting the benefits to show up in your financials.
Yeah, and no, that's exactly right. And what about this? Budgeting. It's not unusual for us to, when we do like a pre-sale due diligence with a client who wants to get as prepared as possible for a third-party sale. We'll ask about technology and just their policies on, when they're going to upgrade. And oftentimes the answer is as needed. Okay, so that clearly that's not the best strategy. Oftentimes it is the strategy. Do you have, the two of you, do you have a recommendation in regard to line item percentage of revenue each year that someone who really wants to grow a scalable business and maximize value over time, a percentage of revenue that should be committed to technology and technology upgrade each and every year?
I think a lot of that depends on the industry. I don't really have a good budget percentage figure. I don't know if Mac does or not.
No, I would agree that it depends on the industry and your overall reliance on your technology infrastructure, which again, in today's operating environment is going to be pretty high for any organization. And what I would think, and this is just kind of my best guess, but around 3 to 5% of your operating budget would be allocated towards IT maintenance, improvements on your data security protocols, making any kind of just regular changes to keep up with best practices. And that would just be general, maintenance and improvements throughout the year. An implementation project would be considerably more expensive than just the general maintenance. So that would be something that, would be broken out as its own separate budget and line item.
Hey, Mac, let me ask you a question. David Grayling, who used to be managing partner here before he retired, his theory on technology, and I'm just going to ask you if you kind of agree with this. His theory was always, we don't want to be the guinea pig. We don't want to be the first one implementing something, but we want to be pretty quick to implement things that are showing, great utility within the CPA industry. Is that kind of the way you look at it? You don't want to be first out or, first out the door, but you do want to be, pretty quick?
I would agree with that to an extent. There are some instances in which it helps to be an early adopter. I mean, it may provide a competitive advantage that puts you ahead of your peers. As I'm sure everybody has heard the term artificial intelligence, way more than they've wanted to in the past year. Being an early adopter of that and really being able to streamline your processes and articulate your value proposition to your clients. I think being an early adopter of that could be really advantageous. But there may be other solutions where there are certain bugs within a system. You don't want to be the guinea pig of somebody's first implementation project for an artificial intelligence program. But yeah, again, I think being kind of on the forefront of that does have its advantages, but it also does obviously pose risks. Again, with the implementation of a new technology that hasn't been tested, there's a lot more risks. But most providers will provide discounts if you're one of their early clients, because they're gonna improve their systems. They're gonna use you almost as a case study or a guinea pig to make improvements. So there are also some cost benefits in there. So it's important to consider, does this have the opportunity to negatively impact my operations or somehow compromise my level of data security? And if not, I do think it can be advantageous to be one of those early adopters. And one thing I also kind of just wanted to jump back to in terms of the overall value proposition of implementing new technologies, because I had mentioned that it's hard to actually factor those into the valuation methods, right, from a quantitative approach. But from a qualitative approach, being able to reference that within a valuation report, or even just being able to mention that during negotiations, is extremely beneficial. Personally, if I'm looking at acquiring, two different companies, all other things equal, one company says, hey, we've been operating on the same systems for the last 15 years. One company says, we just went through a complete overhaul 3 years ago. We allocate X portion to our IT budget every year. Personally, I'm going to go with the organization that's, more forward thinking and technologically advanced. So while, again, you might not see that value within the bottom line, depending on when you implement, still can be a really useful tool in the negotiations.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me ask one other question just to kind of get your feedback. And Pat could certainly answer this too, but what do you say to the business owner who's like, well, I don't want to adapt this technology because every 2 months something changes, and by the time I implement it, it's going to be old.
Yeah, that's it. In some instances, that may be the right approach. If something ultimately is going to be more time and resource consuming than the value it provides, it may be more useful to allocate your time and resources elsewhere. As far as just kind of the impact of the valuation, if that's their concern, there is the possibility that things like that still do impact the overall valuation if it's ultimately, again, we talked about some of those instances and where it's not a wish list item, but it's a requirement due to regulatory standards or outdated technology. If management knows and the valuation expert knows that within the next 3 years, you're going to have to spend $250,000 on some sort of IT implementation project, that is something that would ultimately impact your normalized cash flow from operations. One of the parts of the valuation is to go through the process of normalizing net income and factoring out any potential cash outlays that are required for growth over the next 3 years. And if something like that is a requirement, it's unavoidable, it could still potentially impact the valuation. So again, it's important to consider that in the decision-making process. If this is going to be something that you're just pushing off because you don't want to deal with it, you want to let the next guy deal with it, and you think it's not going to have any impact on the valuation, that you just don't want anybody to be lulled into that kind of false sense of security there.
Right.
Yeah. So Mac, as we wrap up here, we like to try to leave listeners with a few, just 1, 2, or 3 key takeaways that they can take from the conversation and actually apply or implement. It seems like to me, one just foundational idea here that so aligns with everything else we talk about really is have a strategy. Don't be reactive. So for many of those clients that we have and who we've talked to, or business owners we've talked to, let's not wait until something is needed or something gets broken, but let's be proactive and strategic in regard to planning, because it can absolutely impact your valuation at the end of the road. But it also just needs to be part of the budget and so on. But anyway, are there 1, 2, or 3 key points that you would make here in closing?
Yeah, as far as my 3 key points, would definitely recommend making sure that you have the appropriate skills, knowledge, expertise to plan around some of these. If your organization has a CTO or a CIO, this should be something that is a priority for them. They should be the strategic thinking individual within the organization, looking 1 to 3 to 5 years into the future. If you don't have that kind of expertise in-house, would definitely recommend reaching out to an outside consultant. We do recommend on an annual basis performing some kind of assessment over your cybersecurity environment, whether that's looking at your cybersecurity controls for potential enhancements, or if it's looking at your infrastructure overall, looking at the level of communication between the systems, doing a gap or needs assessment. So reaching out to your employees, maybe the finance or the accounting team to see what the issues are with the accounting system, grants management, CRM, whatever it might be, and reaching out to your marketing team to see if they're having any issues with the platforms they leverage, so that you're touching with all the key stakeholders on an annual or even more frequent basis if you're able to. So that way you'll identify those needs or those weaknesses in a timely manner and be able to incorporate that into your planning process. Also, I know Melissa touched on, some information security policies and the importance of those last or 2 weeks ago. So I don't want to be too repetitive, but in terms of just, again, preparing and being ready for any kind of challenges you might face from an IT perspective, specifically business continuity and disaster recovery planning as part of your information security program is really important. As part of that process, you catalog all of your critical IT assets, you risk rank them as to this is high, medium, low risk. Again, using the example of the accounting system, that'll be a high risk platform because of the information it handles, whereas maybe a platform utilized by your marketing department for newsletters that doesn't have sensitive information, that's low risk. So then if something does happen to the organization, or if you do decide that you want to improve upon your systems, you have a risk rank listing of, okay, here are the most critical systems, here are the issues with them, and that's going to help you identify the value to improving upon system A or system B. So again, that helps in planning, but it also does your due diligence in terms of just protecting the organization from any kind of unforeseen risk events. And I think Melissa even mentioned on her episode that lack of these types of policies, procedures can also be deemed as negligent. In the worst case event that something does happen and somebody performs an investigation, whether it be your insurance provider or a regulator, a funder, if they determine that there's no policies, procedures in place, again, that could be deemed negligent, and an insurance carrier could use that as justification for not paying out on a claim. A donor could use that as justification for not awarding you work, or maybe even requesting reimbursement for certain expenses. So again, there could be all sorts of different issues there, regulatory fines and penalties for not complying with certain frameworks. So again, there's lots of value to be derived from having a defined business continuity and disaster recovery policy as well. And again, I think that also will help, that will sort of influence your periodic risk assessment, and vice versa. Information that comes out of that risk assessment will ultimately impact the disaster recovery program. So doing those hand in hand or conjunctively can be really valuable for an organization.
Outstanding. It's terrific. Fantastic. That's a lot of great content. I think listeners are going to benefit greatly from this conversation. Mac, thanks again for joining us. Anything you want to promote today?
No, I don't think anything that I
What
have.
about at least the cyber assessment? Promote that at least.
Oh yeah, I mean, in terms of the services that we would provide, I would recommend anybody look at the GRF website under our cybersecurity services. There's a whole slew of information on there, from proactive activities to just protecting your organization on a day-to-day basis from cyber threats, to more advanced services that go into strategic planning, like we had talked about, providing that more strategic and forward-thinking mind to look at what's in the pipeline, what should we consider for the next 1 to 3 to 5 years from an IT perspective. So I would definitely recommend looking at that. And then we also, our risk advisory team, we help our clients in performing system assessments. So that can be anything from looking at the current system assessment and identifying the gaps or weaknesses within there that you need to improve upon with the current system, or looking at the gaps and weaknesses in the current system and identifying potential new solutions that you could bring into the fold. So we kind of help our clients, from the initial, the most beginning phases all the way through implementation. And we also do have an ATS group that also assists with actual detailed implementation, which is something our risk advisory group doesn't assist with, but we do have those skills, knowledge, and expertise in-house at GRF.
All right, fantastic. And then so would you want to provide your contact information as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, just at Mac Lillard, or you can always reach me by email, mlillard@grfcpa.com. Please feel free, reach out to connect. If anybody has any follow-up questions, I'm always open to jumping on a call to talk through anything that your listeners might have questions over or might be more interested in.
Thanks,
Great.
Mac.
Thanks, Mac.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you
it.
both. It's been
And
fun.
so listeners, you heard it again here today. You can't get started soon enough. And this is just one more reason for that. This week I was contacted by two new owners. One has a 10-year time frame. Fantastic. The other one says, I'm ready to plan for my exit. I want to leave at the end of 2024. That not so fantastic. There's very little that can be done at this point to help, particularly with something like this. So get started sooner rather than later, folks. And if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for that eventual exit, and again, what we do is we'll help you decide which exit route is going to be most advantageous for you. We're agnostic as to which route. It's just a matter of which one is going to accomplish your goals and objectives best. We want to help you discern what that is, decide what it is, and then help you put a plan in place to make it happen. If you need help with any of that, you can contact Walter at 301-951-9090, and you can contact me at 301-859-0860. And you can access resources at grfcpa.com and nslp.com. Thank you for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial signing off.